Hi dear students, today we begin our lesson with the human nervous system. All the cells, tissues and organs that help to send messages from one part of the body to the next are said to be the nervous system. The nervous system of human is composed of neurons. Neurons are the cells adapted to send messages from one part of the body to the next. Just like other cells inside the body, neurons contain a cell membrane, a cytoplasm and a nucleus. There are three types of neurons: sensory neurons, motor neurons and associate neurons. Sensory neurons are the neurons that send messages from receptors to the central nervous system. Motor neurons are the neurons that send messages from the central nervous system to a particular gland or muscles. Associate neuron or mixed neurons are actually the neurons that link sensory neuron to the motor neurons. Okay, let's study a little bit more. The human nervous system is made of special cells called neurons. Neurons contain the same basic part, the same basic feature as any animal cell. Each has a nucleus, cytoplasm and a cell membrane. Their structure is typically adapted to carry messages away very quickly. Okay, so it means that the central nervous system or the nervous system of the human is composed of neurons. We studied different types of neurons. Now just see a little bit more. To enable them to do this, they have long, thin fibers of cytoplasm stretching out from the cell body. The longest fiber is called axon. Axon can be more than a meter long. The shorter fiber are called dendrites. Dear student, we explained the structure of neuron in more detail in the structure of typical neuron cell. They contain a cytoplasm, they contain a cell body, they contain dendrites. Dendrites are part of the neuron. They are called inputs of the neuron. With the help of dendrites, they receive information from nearby cells. Axon is part of the neuron. They carry messages from the cell body to the axon terminal, and axon are actually protected or wrapped by myelin sheet. Myelin sheet is an insulation. They insulate the neuron or the axon of the neuron from nearby or other neurons. Myelin sheet are made by special cells called Schwann cells. The dendrites pick up electrical signals from other neurons lying nearby. These cells are called nerve impulses. The signal passes to the cell body, then along the axon, which might pass it to another neurons. One thing I would like to add over here is our brain does not know anything about the stimuli or cannot read the stimuli directly, like temperature or, for example, pressure, etc., pain, etc. Our brain can only read electrical impulses. Therefore, receptors are the cells that convert one form of energy into another form. For example, there are receptor cells in the eyes. They convert light energy into electrical impulses, because our brain can only read impulses, not something like green color or white color. Okay, myelin. Myelin is actually a sheet surrounding the axon. Okay, it is an insulation. It insulates the axon from other neurons, and it is made by special cells called Schwann cells. Some of the nerve fiber of active animals like mammals are wrapped in a layer of fat and protein called myelin. Every now and then there are narrow gaps in the myelin sheets. We studied the gaps are nodes of Ranvier, and messages actually jump from one node of Ranvier to the next, and this makes the messages very fast. Neurons that are not wrapped or protected by myelin sheet are usually slow responding, or for example the messages are not as fast as they are in myelinated neurons. Myelinated neurons send messages at the rate of 100 meters per second. Unmyelinated neurons send messages at the rate of 5 meters per second. We have seen that the signals that neurons transmit in the form of electrical impulses. Okay, myelin insulates the nerve fibers so that they can carry these impulses much faster. For example, a myelinated nerve fiber in a cat's body can carry impulses at up to 100 meters per second. A fiber over here means axon, without myelin can only carry impulses at about 5 meters per second. A huge difference. Now, dear students, look at this structure. You can see that this is the brain and this is the spinal cord. Now, your brain and the spinal cord form the central nervous system. Okay, brain and spinal cord. This is brain and this is spinal cord. So the brain and spinal cord form the central nervous system. Okay, now if you look at here, these are different parts of the body, and different parts of the body are connected to the central nervous system. Now, through some specific neurons or some specific nerves. So all the nerves, they connect all parts of your body to central nervous system are said to be peripheral nervous system. Now, peripheral nervous system are of two types. One is called autonomic nervous system and another is called somatic nervous system. These are also called subconscious. Okay, because you don't have to do anything to control these organs, although you can control these organs. Okay, so there are specific parts of the body we can control and other parts we cannot control. Okay, so for example, you cannot control the function of your lungs, your heart, okay, or your digestive system. All these organs are connected to the central nervous system, and these are said to be autonomic. You don't have to do to control these things. Now look at here, these are the muscles, and you can excellently control your skeletal muscles. Therefore, those muscles are said to be voluntary muscles. Okay, because you can excellently control the movements in these muscles. For example, muscles in your arm, you can pick a book, or for example you can walk, run, stand or sit, etc. Just because certain muscles are under your conscious control, so those are said to be somatic muscles. Okay, so all parts of the body are connected to the central nervous system. The nerves, they connect, or a type of nervous system, they connect all parts of the body to the central nervous system, are said to be the peripheral nervous system. Now let me explain the central nervous system a little bit more. Okay, all mammals and many other animals have a central nervous system, CNS, and a peripheral nervous system, PNS. This central nervous system is made up of brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is made up of nerves and receptors. Receptors are the transducers or energy transducers. They convert one form of energy to another form. For example, pain receptor convert pain into electrical impulses, okay? Or for example, pressure receptor convert pressure into electrical signals, okay? Next, when a receptor detects a stimulus, it sends an electrical impulse to the brain or spinal cord. The brain and spinal cord receive the impulse and send an impulse on along the appropriate nerve fiber to appropriate effector. Now let me explain the effector. Effector are actually part of the body. They are designed to make an appropriate response. For example, if you touch something very hot and now a message is sent from the part of the body or from the hand to the central nervous system in the brain. Now they send a message to the biceps muscle to pull your hands away from those hot objects, okay? So muscles are said to be effector because they actually respond to the stimulus, okay? Some of the glands like endocrine glands can also be called effectors. Now look at this structure. Now this is your finger and this is a pinprick, okay? Now there are pain receptors right here. Pain is detected by pain receptors and they are connected to sensory neurons. The sensory neurons send this information to the central nervous system, the spinal cord. Now there are another neuron. This is called sensory neuron, associate neuron, and motor neuron. Message move from here, right here. Okay, this is actually the pathway from where the messages from the finger is moved to the spinal cord. Okay, now this information is processed by the spinal cord. Your spinal cord is an elongation of the brain. Okay, now you can see that this neuron is said to be associate neuron. It connects the sensory neuron to the motor neurons. Now the motor neuron, you can see that a message from the central nervous system is passed into the effector. This is a particular muscle. They need to respond to a particular stimulus. So the pathway along which messages are moved from the receptors to the central nervous system and from central nervous system to a particular effector is said to be reflex arc. This is actually said to be the reflex arc, the pathway along which messages are sent from the receptor to the central nervous system and from the central nervous system to a particular effector is said to be the reflex arc. Now we are going to explain the reflex arc a little bit more. Reflex arc. If your hand touches a hot plate, an impulse is picked up by a sensory receptor in your finger. It travels to the spinal cord along the axon from the receptor cells. This cells is called sensory neurons. In the spinal cord, the neuron passes an impulse onto several other neurons. These neurons are called a relay neuron, associate neuron, or mixed neuron. You can see these are actually the three names for the same neuron because they relay the impulses on to another neurons. The relay neuron pass the impulse onto the brain or an effector. In this case, the effector are the muscles in your arm. The impulse travel to the muscle along the axon of motor neuron. These muscles then contract so that your hand is pulled away. This sort of reaction is called a reflex action. Remember one thing, reflex action are not under your conscious control. You cannot control the reflex actions because they are involuntary, okay, or they are automatic and they are very quick. For example, if you touch an electric wire, and if this message sent from the receptors to the central nervous system, and the brain or the central nervous system process it and then make a particular response, now it will take longer period of time and you will damage your arm. Therefore, you don't, in this case, brain is kept. It means that this type of information or this type of actions are actually controlled by the spinal cord. Therefore, they are called spinal reflexes, okay. For example, if a dust particle move towards your eyes blink, okay, without even your control, okay. You don't have to do to control the blinking, okay. This is an automatic action and you don't have to do much more about them. For example, as the dust particle move into your lungs, you suddenly cough. Now this is an automatic response. You don't have to do anything with them. This is the reflex action. This is controlled by the spinal cord, not by the brain, because in this action brain is kept. Messages from the spinal cord, messages are sent to the spinal cord and then to a particular effector. Now, dear students, let me explain one thing more. This, you can see that this is the nerve ending of one neuron and this is the nerve ending of another neuron, okay. So we call this neuron presynaptic cell and this neuron postsynaptic cell. Now this is one neuron, look at here, and this is another neuron. Messages are sent from presynaptic cell to the postsynaptic cells. Now this part is zoomed in order to understand what happens right here. Now you can see that the nerve ending of one neuron and another neuron do not touch each other. There is gap between them, okay. This is said to be synapse, okay. Neurons do not touch each other, okay. Messages are sent from one neuron to another neuron. This is called synapse. Now the gap is said to be synaptic cleft, okay. This gap is said to be synaptic cleft. Now you can see that there are many chemicals. Those chemicals are said to be neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters contain information in them, okay. They move along over here, they releases all the neurotransmitters. Those neurotransmitters are accepted by receptors right here, okay, and information from this neuron is passed to this neuron, okay. This is how information passes from one neuron to another neuron, okay. Now this is said to be synapse. Now we are going to explain the synapse a little bit more. A junction between two nerve cells and neuron are the same thing, okay. Nerve cells consisting of a minute gap, minute, it's not minute, minute, smaller, minute over here means smaller, minute gap across which impulses pass by diffusion of neurotransmitter. These are the chemicals. They send messages from one neuron to another neuron. Inside the sensory neurons axon are hundreds of tiny vacuoles or vesicles. These each contain a chemical called transmitter substance or neurotransmitters. Synapses ensures that nerve impulses only travel in one way or one direction, okay, means from presynaptic neuron to postsynaptic neuron. Now these are actually the sense organ. They detect changes in the environment, okay. Now we have 5 sense organs: the eye, ear, nose, skin, and we also have the tongue. These are the 5 senses, and these 5 senses detect changes in the environment. Okay, they receive information from the environment. The receptor cells present in those sense organs convert them into electrical signals. The sensory cell sends this information to the central nervous system. Okay, now let's study a little bit more the 5 senses of the humans. Okay, dear students, never get confused between receptors and sense organs. They are completely different from one another. For example, eye is said to be a sense organ, and a rod and cone cells that are present in the eye are said to be receptors. Receptors are the transducers. They convert one form of energy into another form. Okay, same is the case with nose. Nose is a sense organ. It contains chemicals, or it detects chemical in the air. Okay, it contains receptor cell which detect chemicals in the air. Same is the case with taste bud. Tongue is a sense organ, and taste bud that are present on the surface of tongue is said to be the receptor cells. The part of an organism body that detects stimuli, the receptors, may be specialized cells or just the ending of sensory neurons. In animals, the receptors are often part of the sense organ. Your eye, for example, is a sense organ, and the rod and cone cells in retina are receptors. They are sensitive to light. Look at the structures right here. Okay, these are actually the detailed structure of the eye. We'll begin from here. You can see this part of the eye is bulging out. Okay, it is transparent, and this part of the eye is said to be cornea. Okay, now the space between the cornea and lens is filled with the fluid, and this fluid is said to be aqueous humor. Okay, now you can see this part. This is actually the part they detect, or the color of the eye. For example, some of the people have blue-eyed, green-eyed, and black-eyed. This is actually the colored part of the eye. Just like this. Okay, the colored part of the eye is said to be the iris. Okay, now there is a smaller window. This smaller window is said to be the pupil, and right here, this is the white part of the eye, and the white part of the eye is said to be sclerotic or sclera. Okay, now look at here. This part is said to be the retina. Okay, this contains rods and cone cells. Retina, this layer, this is the innermost layer, and this is said to be the retina. It contains rod and cone cells, and rod and cone cells are receptor cells. Now the space between retina and the lens is also filled with the fluid, and this fluid is said to be vitreous humor. Okay, filled with the vitreous humor. Now you can see that at this point, nerves called optical nerve move out of the eye through optical nerve. Okay, these, and you can see that the yellow color, these are of the optical nerve. They also contain arteries and veins. Arteries provide oxygen rich blood to the kidneys. Veins collect deoxygenated blood from the eye. Now look at here. Okay, this part is, you can see that this is darkly colored. This darkly colored part of the eye is said to be fovea. Okay, this fovea contain lots of rods and cone cell. Images are usually formed at the fovea. Therefore, images that are formed on the fovea are much clearer as compared to other parts of the eye. Okay, now look at here. This point is said to be blind spot. Blind spot because there is actually no rod and cone cells right here. Therefore, no images are formed right here. Okay. Now you can see that there are muscles are attached or eyes are attached to the muscles, and they control movement of the other to left and right, or to one way or another way. Now you can see that there are actually lens, and this lens is actually made up of connective tissue. Now the lens is connected to ciliary body and muscles and suspensory ligaments. These are the two types of muscles. They stretch the lens, making thinner and thicker. Okay, and this actually exactly focus on the distant and near objects.